It was supposed to be the happiest time of the year. Christmas break had just started, and 19-year-old Sophie was finally heading home after a tough semester at college. She had been counting down the days, excited to see her family and sleep in her own bed again. But as her bus pulled into the small town she grew up in, something felt different. The streets looked the same, covered in fresh December snow, but there was a heaviness in her chest she couldn't explain. When Sophie walked through the front door of her childhood home, she immediately noticed the silence. Her stepmother, Patricia, was in the kitchen, but she barely looked up when Sophie entered. There was no warm hug, no excited questions about school, just a cold nod and a mumbled hello. Sophie tried to shake it off, thinking maybe Patricia was just having a bad day. After all, it had only been 6 months since Sophie's father had died suddenly from a heart attack. Everyone was still grieving, but as the days went by, things only got worse. Patricia seemed irritated by Sophie's very presence. Her 2 younger half-siblings, who used to run up and hug her when she came home, now barely spoke to her. They spent most of their time in their rooms or watching television, acting like Sophie was invisible. Whenever Sophie tried to talk to Patricia about her dad, about the funeral she had missed because she was taking final exams, Patricia would change the subject or walk away. Sophie felt like a stranger in her own home. The pictures of her and her father that used to hang in the hallway were gone. His favorite chair in the living room had been replaced. It was as if Patricia was erasing every trace of him, and in the process, erasing Sophie too. But Sophie tried to be understanding. She knew Patricia was struggling financially. Her father had been the main breadwinner, and now Patricia was working 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. One cold evening, about a week before Christmas, Patricia asked Sophie to go to the pharmacy across town to pick up medication for her youngest half-brother, who had been sick with the flu. Sophie didn't mind helping. In fact, she was grateful for any chance to feel useful, to feel like part of the family again. She bundled up in her winter coat, grabbed the car keys to her father's old sedan, the one Patricia said she could use, and headed out into the snowy night. The roads were worse than she expected. A winter storm had been predicted, but Sophie thought she could make it there and back before it got too bad. She was wrong. As she drove along the old highway that cut through the woods outside of town, the snow started falling harder. The windshield wipers could barely keep up. Sophie slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. Then she saw the patch of black ice too late. The car started sliding, spinning out of control. Sophie tried to steer into the skid like her father had taught her years ago, but nothing worked. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion and too fast at the same time. The car veered off the road, crashed through a wooden guardrail, and slammed into a thick tree at the bottom of a small embankment. The impact was devastating. Sophie's head smashed against the side window despite her seatbelt. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and overwhelming. She tried to move, tried to reach for her phone, but nothing below her waist would respond. Panic set in. She could see her legs, but she couldn't feel them. She couldn't move them. Blood trickled down her face, warm against the freezing air that was now rushing into the car through the broken windshield. Sophie screamed for help, but the road above was empty. The snow kept falling, covering the crash site, making it harder for anyone to see the car from the road. She drifted in and out of consciousness, the cold seeping into her bones. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. All she knew was the pain, the cold, and the terrifying numbness below her waist. Finally, headlights appeared on the road above. A truck driver, making his late-night delivery route, noticed the broken guardrail and the tracks in the snow. He called for help immediately. Within 20 minutes, ambulances and fire trucks arrived. The paramedics worked quickly, carefully extracting Sophie from the wreckage. She heard them talking in urgent voices, medical terms she didn't understand. All she could think about was whether she would ever walk again. The hospital became Sophie's new reality. She underwent emergency surgery that night to stabilize her spine. When she finally woke up 3 weeks later, groggy and confused, a doctor stood beside her bed with a gentle but serious expression. He explained that she had suffered a severe spinal cord injury. The damage was permanent. She would never walk again. The words didn't seem real at first. Sophie just stared at the ceiling, unable to process what this meant for her future. Patricia visited once. Just once. She stood at the foot of Sophie's hospital bed looking uncomfortable and distant. She didn't hold Sophie's hand or offer words of comfort. Instead, she talked about how difficult things were at home, how expensive everything was getting, how she had to think about her own children's future. Sophie noticed Patricia couldn't quite meet her eyes. After about 15 minutes, Patricia said she had to get back to work and left. She never came back. The nurses tried to be encouraging, but Sophie could see the pity in their eyes. Physical therapists came daily, teaching her how to transfer from the bed to a wheelchair, how to navigate a world that wasn't built for someone like her. Each small task that used to be automatic now required planning, strength, and determination. Getting dressed took an hour. Taking a shower required special equipment and exhausted her completely. As the weeks passed, Sophie kept expecting Patricia to return, to discuss what would happen when she was discharged. But Patricia never answered her calls. Sophie's friends from college sent a few text messages at first, but those eventually stopped too. She was alone in that hospital room, recovering from an accident that had stolen her ability to walk, facing a future that terrified her, and slowly realizing that the family she thought she had was disappearing, just like her father had. On the day Sophie was finally discharged, after 2 months of rehabilitation, a hospital social worker sat down with her to discuss her options. Patricia had made it clear she couldn't take Sophie back. The house wasn't wheelchair accessible, she said, and she couldn't afford the modifications. Sophie felt her heart break all over again. She had nowhere to go, no family who wanted her, no home to return to, just a broken-down wheelchair, a small bag of belongings, and a future that looked darker than that snowy night when her car had crashed through the guardrail. Sophie never imagined her life would come to this. Sitting in a cramped, cold apartment that smelled of mildew and old paint, she stared at the cracked ceiling and wondered how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The social worker at the hospital had helped her find this place. It was all she could afford with the little money she had left from her college savings, and a small settlement from her father's life insurance that Patricia had grudgingly forwarded to her. The apartment was in the worst part of town, in a building that looked like it should have been condemned years ago. But it had one important feature that most places didn't have. It was on the ground floor, which meant Sophie could actually get inside with her wheelchair. The doorways were narrow, and she had to angle herself carefully to get through, scraping her knuckles against the door frames more times than she could count. But at least she didn't have to worry about stairs. The day she moved in, which was really just the day the hospital transport van dropped her off with her few belongings, Sophie realized just how unprepared she was for this new reality. The apartment came with almost nothing. There was an old couch that sagged in the middle, a tiny kitchen table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a mattress on the floor in the bedroom because there was no bed frame. The bathroom was the worst. The doorway was so narrow she could barely squeeze her wheelchair through. The shower was a regular bathtub with no safety bars, no shower seat, nothing that would help someone who couldn't stand. That first night, Sophie cried herself to sleep on that mattress on the floor. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. Her phone sat beside her silent. No calls from Patricia. No messages from her half-siblings. Her college friends had moved on with their lives. They were back at school now, going to parties, stressing about exams, living the life Sophie thought she would be living. Instead, she was here in this terrible apartment wondering how she was going to survive. The building's heating system was a joke. It worked sometimes, usually during the day when Sophie didn't need it as much. But at night, when the temperature dropped below freezing, the ancient radiator in her apartment would clank and hiss but produce hardly any warmth. Sophie learned to sleep in layers, 2 pairs of socks, sweatpants, a long-sleeved shirt, a hoodie, and sometimes even her winter coat piled on top of her blankets. Getting around the neighborhood was its own special nightmare. The sidewalks were cracked and uneven, with potholes and broken concrete everywhere. Tree roots had pushed up sections of the walkway, creating obstacles that made pushing her wheelchair exhausting. When it snowed, which it did frequently that winter, the sidewalks never got cleared properly. Sophie would get stuck, her wheels spinning uselessly in the slush and ice until someone took pity on her and helped push her free. The worst part was how invisible she felt. People on the street would look right through her as if she wasn't there. Sometimes they would stare, but not in a kind way. They would stare with curiosity or pity or discomfort, then quickly look away. Young kids would point until their parents shushed them and pulled them along. Sophie started to hate leaving her apartment, even though staying inside meant facing the cold, the loneliness, and her own dark thoughts. Money became an obsession. Sophie counted every dollar, every penny. She made spreadsheets tracking her expenses, trying to figure out how to make her dwindling savings last as long as possible. Rent was $600 a month for this terrible apartment, which seemed outrageous until she realized that nowhere else would rent to her. Most landlords took one look at her wheelchair and suddenly the apartment wasn't available anymore, even though she could see it clearly was. Food was another constant worry. Sophie learned to survive on rice, beans, pasta, and whatever vegetables were on sale at the discount grocery store 3 blocks away. The trip to the store was exhausting, pushing her wheelchair there, trying to carry groceries on her lap on the way back. She could only buy what she could carry, which meant multiple trips each week. Sometimes she was so tired after shopping that she would just sit in her apartment and cry. She tried to take showers, but it was dangerous and terrifying. She would transfer from her wheelchair to the edge of the bathtub, then try to lower herself down carefully. More than once she slipped and fell, bruising her arms and legs, which she couldn't even feel. She would lie there in the empty tub, cold water spraying over her, struggling to pull herself back up. Eventually, Sophie started taking what she called sink baths, washing herself section by section while sitting in her wheelchair. It wasn't ideal, but it was safer than risking another fall. The wheelchair itself was falling apart. It was a basic hospital model, not designed for daily use on rough streets and broken sidewalks. The wheels wobbled. One of the armrests was cracked. The cushion on the seat had worn thin, and Sophie could feel every bump and crack in the sidewalk shoot up through her spine. She tried to fix it with duct tape and zip ties, but it was like putting bandages on a sinking ship. As February arrived, bringing with it the coldest temperatures of the winter, Sophie's situation became desperate. She was rationing her food, eating one small meal a day to make her money stretch further. The heating in her building got even worse. Some nights her apartment felt like a freezer. She could see her breath in the air. Her hands would shake so badly from the cold that she could barely type on her laptop. That laptop was her only connection to any kind of work. Sophie had started taking any online job she could find. Data entry that paid $3 an hour. Transcription work that left her ears ringing from listening to poor quality audio files. Writing product descriptions for websites selling cheap stuff. The work was mind-numbing and paid almost nothing, but it was all she could get. Every job application she sent for real positions went unanswered. The few times she got interviews, they went well until the interviewer realized she was in a wheelchair. Then suddenly the position would be filled, or they would say they'd call her back and never did. Sophie had one friend in the building, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen who lived 2 doors down. Mrs. Chen was a widow in her 70s who had immigrated from China decades ago. She spoke broken English, but her kindness needed no translation. She had noticed Sophie struggling one day and had started checking on her regularly. Mrs. Chen would bring Sophie soup, homemade dumplings, or just sit and keep her company for an hour, chatting about her grandchildren and her memories of her late husband. One night in late February was the worst night of Sophie's life since the accident. The temperature outside dropped to 10 degrees below zero. The building's heating system failed completely. Sophie tried everything. She turned on her oven and left the door open, which she knew was dangerous, but she was desperate. She piled every piece of clothing she owned on top of herself, but nothing worked. The cold was overwhelming, seeping into her bones. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Her fingers turned blue. She couldn't think straight. She just kept getting colder and colder. Sophie didn't remember much about that night. Later, Mrs. Chen told her she had knocked on Sophie's door around midnight to check on her and got no answer. Worried, Mrs. Chen had used her spare key that Sophie had given her for emergencies. She found Sophie barely conscious, shaking violently, her lips blue. Mrs. Chen had called for help and brought over 2 electric heaters from her own apartment, wrapping Sophie in blankets and holding her until she stopped shaking. The next morning, Sophie woke up in her bed, warm for the first time in days, with Mrs. Chen sleeping in a chair beside her. When the older woman woke up and saw Sophie was okay, she started crying and scolding her at the same time in a mix of English and Chinese. She made Sophie promise to come to her apartment whenever the heat failed. Sophie agreed, too exhausted and grateful to argue. That night had broken something in Sophie, not just physically but emotionally. She realized that she couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. She either needed to find a way to make more money, find better housing, or find some reason to keep fighting through each freezing, lonely day, because she wasn't sure how much longer she could survive in this cold, forgotten corner of the world where nobody seemed to care if she lived or died. Spring should have brought hope, but for Sophie it just brought different problems. The snow finally melted, leaving behind crumbling sidewalks and potholes that made navigating her neighborhood even harder. Her wheelchair, which had barely survived the winter, was now in terrible shape. The left wheel made a grinding sound with every rotation. The footrest on the right side was held on with wire. The brake on one side didn't work anymore, but Sophie had no money to fix it, let alone buy a new one. She made do with what she had, the same way she made do with everything else in her life. Finding work became Sophie's obsession. Every morning she would spend hours on her laptop searching job boards, filling out applications, sending her resume to anyone who might hire her. She applied for office jobs, customer service positions, anything that could be done sitting down. Her qualifications were good. She had completed 1.5 years of college with excellent grades. She was smart, hardworking, and desperate. But none of that seemed to matter. At first, some companies would respond. They would send her emails asking for phone interviews. Sophie would feel a spark of hope. She would prepare carefully, researching the company, practicing her answers. The phone interviews usually went well. She could tell the interviewer was impressed. They would say things like, "You sound perfect for this position," or, "I think you'd be a great fit for our team." Then they would invite her for an in-person interview. That's when everything would fall apart. Sophie would arrive at the office building, struggling to find the accessible entrance, which was almost always around the back, near the dumpsters. She would navigate narrow hallways and hope the elevator was working. When she finally made it to the interview, she could see the change in the interviewer's face. That moment of surprise, followed by discomfort. The interview would continue, but it was different now. The questions became shorter. The warmth from the phone conversation was gone. They would wrap things up quickly and say those dreaded words, "We'll be in touch." They never were. Within a few days, Sophie would receive a generic rejection email. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates. We don't feel you're the right fit at this time. We've filled the position." She knew what was really happening. They didn't want to hire someone in a wheelchair. They probably worried about the cost, about accessibility accommodations, about how it would look to customers. Nobody ever said that, of course. But Sophie could feel it. After dozens of rejections, Sophie stopped applying for in-person jobs. It was too heartbreaking, too exhausting. Instead, she focused on remote work, online jobs that she could do from her apartment. At least that way, nobody could judge her based on her wheelchair. They would only see her work, her skills, her determination. But even online work was hard to find and paid very little. Sophie became a regular on every freelancing website she could find. She created profiles, uploaded samples of her writing, offered her services for data entry, transcription, virtual assistance, anything she could do with a laptop and an internet connection. She would bid on projects, often competing against hundreds of other people from around the world who were willing to work for almost nothing. When she did get hired, the pay was terrible. $3 to write a 500-word article, $5 to transcribe an hour-long audio file, $10 to enter data into spreadsheets for 3 hours. Sophie worked constantly, sometimes 12 or 14 hours a day, hunched over her laptop at her tiny kitchen table. Her back ached. Her wrists hurt from typing so much. Her eyes burned from staring at the screen. But she kept going because she had no choice. At the end of each month, after paying rent and utilities, after buying the cheapest food she could find, Sophie would have maybe $20 or $30 left, sometimes less. There was nothing left for new clothes, for fixing her wheelchair, for any kind of medical care or therapy that might help her. She was surviving, barely. But she wasn't living. The isolation was crushing. Sophie had no social life, no friends, no connection to the world outside her apartment and the few blocks she could navigate in her broken wheelchair. Her old friends from college had completely stopped reaching out. Their lives had moved on. They were probably finishing their sophomore year now. going to parties, dating, planning for their futures. Sophie had been part of that world once, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Mrs. Chen remained her only real connection to another human being. The elderly woman would visit every few days, always bringing food that Sophie was too proud to ask for, but too hungry to refuse. Mrs. Chen's homemade dumplings, her soups, her stir-fried vegetables. These meals were often the only real food Sophie ate. The rest of the time it was rice and beans, pasta with whatever sauce was on sale, ramen noodles that cost 25 cents a package. Mrs. Chen would tell Sophie about her life, her family, her grandchildren who lived across the country and rarely visited. She would show Sophie pictures on her phone, her face lighting up with pride. In return, Sophie would tell Mrs. Chen about her father, about the life she used to have before the accident. She never complained about Patricia, about being abandoned. She was too ashamed to admit that her own stepmother had thrown her away like garbage. But somehow Sophie sensed that Mrs. Chen understood anyway. One afternoon in late March, Sophie's wheelchair finally gave up. She was trying to get back to her apartment after a grueling trip to the grocery store when the left wheel just snapped off. The bolt that held it to the frame broke, and suddenly Sophie was tilted sideways, groceries spilling off her lap onto the sidewalk. She sat there, stunned, watching a can of beans roll into the gutter. People walked past, some glancing at her, but nobody stopped to help. Sophie wanted to scream. She wanted to cry, but instead she took a deep breath and tried to figure out what to do. She couldn't push herself with only one working wheel. Her apartment was still half a block away. She tried pulling herself along, the sidewalk using her arms, dragging her broken wheelchair behind her, but it was slow and exhausting. By the time she made it to her building, her hands were scraped and bleeding. She had left most of her groceries scattered on the sidewalk. $20 worth of food, wasted. That night, Sophie tried to fix the wheelchair with tools from Mrs. Chen's apartment. But the bolt was completely stripped and the frame around it was cracked. It wasn't something that could be fixed with duct tape this time. Sophie needed a new wheelchair, or at least professional repairs, and that cost money she absolutely did not have. She spent an hour researching wheelchair repair shops, calling the few that were listed, but the cheapest quote she got was $200. She might as well have been asking for $2 million. For the next week, Sophie barely left her apartment. She rationed the little food she had left and kept working on her laptop, taking any job she could find, desperately trying to save up enough money to fix her wheelchair. But then her laptop started having problems. The screen would flicker. Sometimes it would freeze completely, and Sophie would have to restart it, losing whatever work she had been doing. She realized with growing panic that if her laptop died, she would have no way to earn even the tiny amount of money she was making. She would be completely trapped, unable to work, unable to go anywhere, unable to survive. The stress was overwhelming. Sophie stopped sleeping well. She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with worry. How would she pay next month's rent? What would she eat when her food ran out? What would happen if she got sick and needed to see a doctor? Every problem seemed impossible to solve. Every day felt like she was sinking deeper into a hole she would never climb out of. Mrs. Chen noticed the change in Sophie. She started visiting more often, bringing food, sitting with her, sometimes not even talking, just being there. One evening, Mrs. Chen held Sophie's hand and said in her broken English, "You strong girl, very strong, don't give up. Something good coming, I feel it." Sophie wanted to believe her, but hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. By the end of March, Sophie had made a decision. She couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change drastically or she was going to completely fall apart. She needed to find a better job, a real job, something that paid enough to actually live on. But how could she do that when nobody would hire her? How could she convince someone to take a chance on a girl in a broken wheelchair who had been abandoned by her own family? Sophie didn't know the answer, but she knew she had to try one more time. Because the alternative, giving up completely, was something she wasn't ready to accept. Not yet. April brought the first real warmth of spring. The sun was actually warm on Sophie's face as she sat outside her apartment building one morning, gathering courage for what she planned to do. Mrs. Chen had lent Sophie her old wheelchair, a hospital model similar to Sophie's broken one but in slightly better condition. It wasn't perfect, but at least both wheels worked. Today, Sophie had decided she was going to the public library. The library had always been one of Sophie's favorite places growing up. Her father used to take her there every Saturday when she was little. They would spend hours wandering through the aisles, picking out books, sitting together in the reading corner. After he died, Sophie hadn't been able to bring herself to go back. It hurt too much to remember those happy times. But now she had a practical reason to visit. The library had free internet, free heating, and free air conditioning. More importantly, it was a place where she could work on her laptop without using her own electricity, saving a few precious dollars. The journey to the library took almost 40 minutes. It was only about a mile from her apartment, but the sidewalks were still difficult to navigate, and Mrs. Chen's wheelchair was heavier and harder to push than her old one. By the time Sophie rolled up the ramp to the library entrance, she was sweating and exhausted. But when the automatic doors opened and she felt the cool air inside, saw the rows of books stretching out before her, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. A tiny spark of peace. The library was quiet on a Tuesday morning. A few elderly people sat in the reading area with newspapers. A mother with 2 young children browsed the picture book section. Sophie made her way to the computer area, but all the desktop computers were taken. Instead, she headed toward the back of the library where she remembered there were tables and chairs, a good place to set up with her own laptop. As she rolled past the literature section, something caught her eye. On the top shelf, way out of her reach, was a book she recognized. It was a collection of short stories by her father's favorite author. She and her dad had read those stories together years ago. Sophie stopped her wheelchair and stared up at it, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. She wanted that book. She needed it. Like touching it might somehow bring her closer to her father again. Sophie looked around, hoping to see a library employee with one of those long poles they used to reach high shelves, but nobody was nearby. She tried standing up from her wheelchair, thinking maybe she could grab the edge of the shelf and pull herself up just enough to reach. But she had no balance, no strength in her legs, and she almost fell. She lowered herself back down, feeling frustrated and stupid. "That's way up there," a voice said behind her. Sophie turned to see a man standing a few feet away. He was probably in his mid-30s, dressed in nice jeans and a button-down shirt, looking professional but casual. He had kind eyes and an easy smile. "Do you need help reaching something?" Sophie hesitated. She had gotten so used to people either ignoring her or treating her like a child that she wasn't sure how to respond to someone who seemed genuinely friendly. Yes, actually. That blue book on the top shelf. The short story collection. I'd really appreciate it if you could get it for me." The man stepped forward and easily retrieved the book, handing it to Sophie. "Great choice," he said, glancing at the cover. "I've read this. The story about the lighthouse keeper is incredible." Sophie's face lit up. "That's my favorite one too. My dad and I used to read it together." Then she caught herself feeling like she had shared too much with a stranger. But the man didn't seem to mind. "Your dad has good taste. I'm Christopher, by the way." He held out his hand. Sophie shook it, noting his firm but gentle grip. "I'm Sophie. Thanks for helping me with the book." "No problem at all," Christopher said. Then, to Sophie's surprise, he gestured to a nearby table. "I don't mean to intrude, but would you mind if I joined you? I was about to sit down and do some reading myself. This is my favorite section of the library." Sophie was caught off guard. When was the last time someone had actually wanted to sit with her? To choose her company? "Sure," she said, trying to sound casual. "I mean, it's a public library. Sit wherever you want." They moved to the table together. Sophie pulled out her laptop, intending to work on some freelance projects. But Christopher started asking her about the book, about other stories she liked, and before she knew it, they were deep in conversation about literature, authors, favorite genres. Christopher was well-read and thoughtful. He didn't talk down to her or act weird about her wheelchair. He just talked to her like she was a normal person, which was something Sophie had almost forgotten how to handle. As they talked, Sophie found herself studying Christopher more carefully. His clothes were expensive, she realized, though understated. His watch looked fancy. He had an air of confidence about him, the kind that came from being successful and comfortable in the world. Sophie became self-conscious about her own appearance. She was wearing her nicest jeans, but they were old and worn. Her jacket had a stain on it she couldn't get out. She probably looked like exactly what she was: poor, struggling, barely surviving. But if Christopher noticed any of that, he didn't show it. He was genuinely interested in what she had to say. When she mentioned she used to be in college studying English and journalism, his eyes lit up. Really? That's fantastic. Are you planning to go back? Sophie's smile faded a little. Eventually, maybe. Right now I'm just trying to work and save up money. It's complicated. Christopher nodded, not pushing for details. I get that. Life throws curveballs sometimes. Then he paused, seeming to consider something. You know, this might be forward of me, but my company is actually looking for people who can write well. We need content creators for our website and marketing materials. Would you be interested in something like that? Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Your company? What kind of company? I run a tech startup, Christopher explained. We develop software for small businesses. It's been growing pretty fast, and we desperately need someone who can take complex tech concepts and make them understandable for regular people. Based on our conversation, I think you might be perfect for it. Sophie wanted to believe him, but she had been disappointed too many times. I appreciate that, but I should tell you I don't have a lot of formal experience, and I'm sure you have tons of qualified applicants. Christopher pulled out his wallet and retrieved a business card, sliding it across the table to Sophie. She picked it up and read it. Christopher Davies, CEO and founder. The company name was printed below along with contact information. Sophie's eyes widened. This wasn't just some guy who worked at a tech company. He owned it. I'm serious, Christopher said. Send me your resume and a writing sample. Anything you've written that you're proud of, I'll review it personally. If your writing is half as good as your conversation, you'll definitely get an interview. Sophie stared at the business card, barely able to breathe. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. I don't know what to say. Thank you. I'll definitely send you something. Christopher smiled. Great. I look forward to reading it. He glanced at his watch. I should probably get going. I have a meeting in an hour. But it was really nice talking with you, Sophie. I mean that. After Christopher left, Sophie sat at the library table for a long time, just holding his business card. Part of her was excited, hopeful even. But another part of her was terrified. What if this was just pity? What if he had seen her wheelchair and her worn-out clothes and decided to throw her a bone? What if she sent him her work, and he realized she wasn't as talented as he thought? Mrs. Chen's words came back to her, something good coming. Maybe this was it. Maybe the universe was finally giving her a break, or maybe she was setting herself up for another devastating disappointment. That evening, Sophie sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, trying to decide what to send Christopher. She went through all the freelance work she had done, all the articles and blog posts and product descriptions. Most of it was garbage, written quickly for pennies, not something she was proud of. Finally, she found a personal essay she had written for a college class, before the accident. It was about her relationship with her father, about learning to appreciate the small moments in life. Reading it made her cry, but she knew it was good. It was honest and heartfelt, and showed what she could really do when she cared about her writing. Sophie attached the essay to an email along with a simple resume listing her college coursework and her freelance experience. She kept the message short and professional, thanking Christopher for his time and for the opportunity. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she hit send. The next 3 days were torture. Sophie checked her email obsessively every few minutes, hoping for a response. She imagined every possible outcome. Maybe he had forgotten about their conversation. Maybe he had received hundreds of applications from more qualified people. Maybe he had looked her up online, seen her story, and decided she was too much trouble. Then on the 4th day, Sophie woke up to find an email from Christopher. Her hands shook as she opened it. The message was short and direct. Sophie, I read your essay. You're hired. Can you start next week? Let's discuss details over a video call. How's tomorrow at 2 p.m.? The night before her video call with Christopher, Sophie barely slept. She spent hours cleaning her tiny apartment. Even though only the wall behind her would be visible on camera, she washed her hair twice, trying to make it look presentable. She picked out her best shirt, a simple blue blouse that didn't have any stains or holes. She even practiced what she would say, rehearsing answers to questions she imagined Christopher might ask. When 2 p.m. finally arrived, Sophie sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, her heart pounding. She took 3 deep breaths, checked her appearance one more time in the camera preview, and clicked the video call link Christopher had sent. His face appeared on the screen a moment later, smiling warmly from what looked like a bright modern office. Sophie, great to see you again, Christopher said cheerfully. How have you been? Good, thank you, Sophie replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm really excited about this opportunity. I'm excited too, Christopher said. Your essay was exceptional. The way you captured emotion while keeping the prose clean and accessible, that's exactly what we need. So here's what I'm thinking. We need someone to create content for our blog, write case studies about our clients, develop marketing materials, and help us explain our software to potential customers. Does that sound like something you'd be interested in? Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. That sounds perfect. Christopher talked about the company, its mission, the team. He explained that most of the work would be remote, which Sophie found herself grateful for. She wouldn't have to worry about getting to an office every day, about navigating buildings that might not be accessible. She could work from home, from her apartment, despite how small and terrible it was. Then Christopher mentioned the salary, and Sophie had to stop herself from gasping. It was more money than she had ever imagined earning. Not rich person money, but comfortable person money. The kind of salary that would let her pay rent without panic, buy groceries without counting every penny, maybe even save a little. She tried to keep her expression neutral, professional, but inside she was screaming with joy and relief. That sounds very fair, Sophie managed to say, her voice surprisingly calm. Great, Christopher said. Now I want to be upfront about something. I believe in judging people by their work, not their circumstances. I don't care where you went to college or how traditional your resume looks. What I care about is whether you can do the job well. From what I've seen, you can, so I'm not going to ask you a bunch of typical interview questions. Instead, I want to know what you need to be successful. What kind of support? What kind of resources? What kind of schedule works best for you? The question caught Sophie off guard. Nobody had ever asked her what she needed before. Honestly, the remote work setup is ideal for me. As long as I have deadlines and clear expectations, I work well independently. I'm disciplined and I meet my commitments. Perfect, Christopher said. Then let's start you at 30 hours a week with flexibility to adjust as needed. I'll send you an employment contract to review. Take your time with it. Ask any questions you have. If everything looks good, we can get you set up to start next Monday. How does that sound? It sounds amazing, Sophie said, and this time she couldn't hide the emotion in her voice. Thank you so much, Christopher. You have no idea how much this means to me. Christopher's expression softened. I think I might have some idea. When I was younger, someone took a chance on me when nobody else would. It changed my life. I promised myself that if I ever got to a position where I could do the same for others, I would. So really, thank you for being willing to take a chance on us. After the call ended, Sophie sat at her table in stunned silence. Then she started crying, but this time they were good tears. Happy tears. Relieved tears. She had a job. A real legitimate job with a good salary and a boss who seemed to actually respect her. After months of rejection and struggle and feeling worthless, someone had finally seen her potential. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. The employment contract arrived, and Sophie read through every word carefully with Mrs. Chen looking over her shoulder. Everything was fair, generous even. Health insurance was included, which meant Sophie might finally be able to see a doctor, get physical therapy, maybe even get a proper wheelchair. The thought made her want to cry all over again. Monday morning, Sophie's first day, arrived with sunshine streaming through her apartment window. She got up early, got dressed in her nicest clothes, set up her laptop at the kitchen table, and logged into the company's systems. Christopher had sent her a welcome email with all the information she needed. how to access the project management system, where to find the style guide, who to contact if she had questions. The first few days were overwhelming in the best possible way. Sophie had actual work to do, important work. She wrote blog posts about software solutions for small businesses. She interviewed clients and turned their stories into compelling case studies. She learned about the company's products, studied the competition, developed a voice for the brand. Every piece of work she submitted, Christopher or someone on the team would send back positive feedback. "This is great. Exactly what we needed. Your writing is so clear." For the first time in months, Sophie felt useful, capable, valuable. She would work for hours without noticing time passing, completely absorbed in her projects. The work challenged her in ways that data entry and transcription never had. She was using her brain, her creativity, her skills. She was building something, contributing something meaningful. About 2 weeks into the job, Christopher scheduled another video call. Sophie wondered if something was wrong, if she had made a mistake. But when his face appeared on the screen, he was smiling as usual. "Hey, Sophie, I wanted to check in and see how everything's going. Are you settling in okay?" "It's going really well," Sophie said honestly. "I love the work. The team has been great about answering my questions." "That's wonderful to hear," Christopher said. "I've been getting nothing but positive feedback about your work from the rest of the team. You're exceeding expectations." He paused, then continued. "I also wanted to let you know that we're having a team meeting next month. It'll be in person at our office. I know you're remote, but I'd love for you to attend if you're able. It's a chance for everyone to meet face to face, share ideas, do some planning for the next quarter." Sophie felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. An in-person meeting meant navigating a new building, meeting people in her wheelchair, facing all the discomfort and judgment that usually came with that. But she also didn't want to seem like she wasn't a team player. "I can definitely do that," Sophie said, keeping her voice confident. "Just send me the details about the location and I'll plan accordingly." "Great," Christopher said. Then his expression changed slightly, becoming more serious. "Sophie, I want to ask you something, and please feel free to say no. But I've noticed that when we video call, your background is always the same wall. Your internet connection sometimes drops, and a few times when we've talked in the evening, it looks really cold in your place. Is everything okay? Do you have what you need?" Sophie felt her face flush. She had tried so hard to seem professional, to hide her situation. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "My apartment is just small and the heating isn't great, but it's okay. I manage." Christopher nodded slowly, but his eyes were concerned. "Listen, I'm not trying to pry into your personal life, but if there's anything the company can help with, any resources you need to do your job better, please let me know. We have programs for remote workers, assistance with home office setup, that kind of thing." "I appreciate that," Sophie said. "Really, but I'm okay." They wrapped up the call, but Sophie could tell Christopher didn't entirely believe her. She told herself it didn't matter. As long as she did good work, as long as she met her deadlines and contributed to the team, her personal situation was nobody's business. She didn't need pity or charity. She just needed to keep doing what she was doing. But over the next few weeks, Sophie noticed Christopher finding more reasons to video call with her. Sometimes it was about a project, asking her opinion on a piece of content or discussing strategy. Other times it seemed more casual. He would ask how her day was going, what she was reading, what she thought about different topics. The conversations would stretch longer than they needed to, and Sophie found herself looking forward to them. There was something about talking to Christopher that made Sophie feel seen in a way she hadn't felt since before her accident. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to her answers. He valued her opinions. He made her laugh. And he never, not once, treated her differently because she was in a wheelchair. On video calls, he couldn't see it anyway, and Sophie realized that was part of why these conversations felt so freeing. For those minutes or hours, she was just Sophie, not Sophie in the wheelchair. One evening in late May, Christopher called her unexpectedly around 8 p.m. Sophie had been working on a difficult blog post, struggling to explain a complex feature in simple terms. When she answered the video call, Christopher looked tired but happy. "Hey, sorry for calling so late," he said. "I just finished reading that case study you sent this morning. Sophie, it's incredible." June arrived with warm weather and longer days. Sophie had been working for Christopher's company for almost 2 months, and her life had improved dramatically. She could pay her rent without panic. She could buy groceries without counting every penny. She had even managed to save a little money, though not enough yet to fix her wheelchair or move to a better apartment. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was the feeling that she mattered again, that she had value, that she was part of something. The team meeting Christopher had mentioned was scheduled for the first week of June. Sophie was nervous, but also excited. She had been communicating with her coworkers through email and chat for weeks, but she had never met any of them in person. She spent a week preparing, making sure her work for the company was up to date, planning her route to the office, checking that the building had accessible entrances. The night before the meeting, Sophie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds of her neighborhood, thinking about how much had changed since that terrible winter. She thought about Mrs. Chen, who had been so happy to see Sophie thriving. She thought about Christopher, whose late-night video calls had become the highlight of her days. They talked about work, but they also talked about books, about life, about their dreams and fears. Sophie had started to feel something for him that went beyond professional respect, and she suspected he felt it too, though neither of them had said anything. Around midnight, Sophie heard a crack of thunder. Within minutes, rain was pouring down outside her window. Then the lights in her apartment flickered once, twice, and went out completely. Sophie groaned. Power outages weren't uncommon in her building, especially during storms. Usually the power came back within an hour or two. She found a flashlight Mrs. Chen had given her and settled in to wait. But an hour passed, then two, and the power stayed off. Sophie's laptop battery was at 15%. She had been planning to finish some work tonight, to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. Without power, she couldn't charge it. Worse, her phone was almost dead too, and as the night wore on without the heating system running, the apartment started getting cold despite the summer weather outside. Sophie wrapped herself in blankets and tried to sleep, but she was too anxious about the meeting tomorrow, too worried about her laptop dying. Around 3 in the morning, still unable to sleep, she decided to send Christopher a quick message on her phone while it still had battery. She would let him know she might be a few minutes late to the meeting if the power didn't come back and she couldn't charge her devices. She opened their chat and started typing. Hey, sorry to message so late. Power is out in my building due to the storm. Laptop almost dead. I'll still be at the meeting tomorrow. Just might be a few minutes late if I need to find somewhere to charge my stuff first. But before she could send it, her phone battery hit 1% and died. Sophie sat in the dark, wrapped in blankets, and felt tears of frustration starting to fall. Why did everything have to be so hard? Why couldn't she just have a normal apartment with reliable electricity and heat? Why couldn't she show up to this meeting like a regular professional person, without worrying about dead devices and accessibility issues? She must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing Sophie knew, she was being woken by a loud knocking on her door. Sunlight was streaming through her window. She checked her watch. It was already 9:30 in the morning. The meeting started at 10, and the power was still out. Sophie wheeled herself to the door, assuming it was Mrs. Chen checking on her. But when she opened it, Christopher was standing there, looking worried and slightly frantic. "Christopher?" Sophie said, completely confused. "What are you doing here?" "You didn't show up to the meeting," he said. "You didn't answer your phone or respond to messages. I got worried. I remembered you once mentioned the general area where you lived. So I just started checking apartment buildings until I found your name on a mailbox." He looked past her into the apartment, and Sophie saw his expression change as he took in her surroundings. The dark apartment, the cold air, the sparse, worn furniture, her broken wheelchair leaning against the wall, the blankets piled on her lap because she had been wrapped in them all night. The power went out, Sophie explained, feeling embarrassed and exposed. "My phone and laptop died. I couldn't contact anyone. I was going to try to make it to the meeting anyway, but I overslept." Christopher walked into the apartment without being invited, his eyes scanning everything. Sophie could see him processing it all, connecting dots he had been trying to ignore. "Sophie, how long have you been living like this?" "It's fine," Sophie said quickly. "It's just a power outage. It happens sometimes." "It's not fine," Christopher said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Your apartment is freezing even though it's June. Your furniture looks like it came from a dumpster. That wheelchair over there is held together with tape and wire, and you're sitting here in the dark wrapped in blankets telling me everything is okay." Sophie felt defensive. "I'm managing. I have a job now. Things are getting better. How much is your rent here? Christopher asked suddenly. Sophie hesitated. $600. Christopher looked around the tiny, run-down apartment again. $600 for this? Sophie, that's insane. This place isn't even properly maintained. It's all I could afford, Sophie said, and now her voice was shaking. Do you think I chose to live here? Do you think I want to be in this situation? After my accident, my stepmother threw me out. I had nowhere to go. This was the only place that would rent to someone like me. So yes, it's terrible. Yes, the heat doesn't work and the power goes out, and the sidewalks outside are too broken to navigate safely. But it's what I have. And I'm grateful for it because the alternative was being homeless. The words came pouring out. Months of frustration and shame and pain that Sophie had been holding inside. I'm sorry if my living situation embarrasses you. I'm sorry if it reflects badly on your company to have an employee living in poverty. But I've been trying my best. I've been working hard. I've been doing good work for you. And if it's not enough, if you want to fire me because I'm poor and broken and living in a terrible apartment, then just say it. Christopher looked stunned. Fire you? Sophie, no. That's not what this is about at all. He ran his hand through his hair, clearly trying to figure out what to say. I'm not embarrassed by you. I'm angry at myself for not seeing sooner what you were going through. I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed the signs. He pulled over the rickety kitchen chair and sat down, putting himself at eye level with Sophie. I need to tell you something. When I was 15, I was in my 7th foster home. The family didn't really want me. They just wanted the check that came with me. They gave me a room in the basement with no heat. I slept in my coat every night. I ate whatever scraps they didn't want. I felt invisible and worthless and completely alone. Sophie stared at him, surprised by this revelation. Christopher continued. Then I met this man, a teacher at my school. He noticed I was always wearing the same clothes, that I looked tired and hungry. He started inviting me to stay after school to help with projects, and he would always have food. He talked to me like I mattered. Eventually, he helped me get into a better foster situation, and when I graduated high school, he helped me get a scholarship to college. He changed my entire life just by seeing me and caring. I made a promise to myself back then, Christopher said. If I ever became successful, if I ever had the power to help someone the way that teacher helped me, I would do it without hesitation. So when I met you at the library, when I read your essay and saw your talent, I knew I wanted to hire you. But I also sensed you were struggling with something. I thought if I gave you a good job, it would help. I didn't realize how bad things actually were. Sophie wiped tears from her cheeks. The job did help. It helped so much. I went from making maybe $200 a month to having a real salary. I could eat real food. I could pay my rent without terror. You have no idea what that meant to me. I'm glad, Christopher said gently, but you shouldn't be living like this. Nobody should be living like this, especially not someone as talented and hardworking as you. He stood up and looked around the apartment again. Here's what's going to happen. And before you argue with me, just listen. I own a building downtown. Modern apartments, fully accessible with elevators and wide doorways and all the features someone in a wheelchair needs. One of the units is vacant right now. I want you to move into it. Christopher, I can't afford. It's rent-free, he said firmly, at least until you've saved enough to be financially stable. Consider it a company benefit. We provide housing assistance to employees who need it. You don't have that benefit, Sophie said. You're making this up just for me. Then I'm creating it right now, Christopher said. Sophie, you're one of the best employees I have. Your work is exceptional, but you can't do your best work if you're constantly worried about whether your power will stay on or if you have enough money for food. Let me do this, please. Sophie wanted to refuse. Pride told her she should refuse. But she was so tired of struggling, so tired of being cold and scared and barely surviving. Why are you doing this for me? She whispered. Sophie stood in the doorway of her new apartment, unable to believe what she was seeing. The space was beautiful. Not just nice, but actually beautiful. Sunlight poured through large windows, illuminating hardwood floors and modern furniture. The living room was spacious with a comfortable-looking couch and a flat-screen television. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, all lowered to heights she could actually reach from her wheelchair. But what made Sophie's eyes fill with tears were all the small details that showed someone had really thought about her needs. The doorways were wide, wider than anywhere she had ever lived. There were no steps anywhere, no obstacles, no tight corners she would have to navigate carefully. In the bathroom, there was a roll-in shower with a built-in seat, safety bars on all the walls, and a sink low enough that she could use it comfortably. The bedroom had an adjustable bed that could raise and lower at the touch of a button, making it easier for her to transfer from her wheelchair. "What do you think?" Christopher asked, watching her from across the room. He had been there when the movers arrived, had helped coordinate everything, had refused to leave until Sophie was settled. "It's perfect," Sophie whispered. "It's more than perfect." "I don't even have words," Christopher smiled, looking relieved. "I'm glad you like it. The building manager lives on the first floor if you ever need anything. There's a gym in the basement with accessible equipment. And there's a coffee shop on the ground floor that makes amazing breakfast sandwiches." Sophie wheeled herself through the apartment, exploring every room, running her hands along the smooth countertops, testing the shower controls, looking out the windows at the view of the city below. From up here on the 6th floor, everything looked different. Cleaner, brighter, full of possibility. That night, after Christopher finally left and Sophie was alone in her new home, she took her first real shower in months. The warm water poured over her without her having to worry about falling or struggling. She could just sit there, safe and comfortable, letting the heat soak into her tired muscles. When she finally got out and looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the person staring back. She looked different somehow, less exhausted, less defeated. The next morning, Sophie woke up to actual sunlight streaming through her bedroom window instead of the gray dimness of her old apartment. The bed was so comfortable she had slept better than she had in a year. For a few minutes, she just lay there, listening to the sounds of the city outside, hardly able to believe this was real. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. When Sophie answered it, she found a delivery person with a large package. "Delivery for Sophie Carter," he said cheerfully. Sophie wheeled back inside and opened the box carefully. Inside was a brand new wheelchair, but not just any wheelchair. This was the kind of chair she had only seen in catalogs, the kind that cost thousands of dollars. It was lightweight and sleek, with power assist wheels that would help her navigate hills and rough terrain without exhausting herself. The seat had proper cushioning, adjustable armrests, and even a spot to attach a cup holder or bag. A note was attached. "Every professional needs the right tools for the job. Christopher." Sophie ran her hands over the smooth frame, tested the controls, and felt tears rolling down her cheeks again. She seemed to cry a lot these days, but they weren't sad tears anymore. They were grateful tears, overwhelmed tears. "I can't believe this is my life now" tears. Over the next few weeks, Sophie settled into her new reality. She went to the office for the team meeting she had missed, and everyone was warm and welcoming. Her coworkers were impressed with her writing, asked her questions, wanted to collaborate with her on projects. Nobody treated her differently because of her wheelchair. They just treated her like part of the team. Christopher set her up with a physical therapist, something Sophie had desperately needed, but could never afford. 3 times a week, she would work with a therapist who helped her build strength, manage pain, and learn better techniques for navigating the world in her wheelchair. The sessions were hard, sometimes painful, but Sophie felt herself getting stronger, more confident. She also started seeing a doctor regularly for the first time since her accident. The health insurance Christopher's company provided was excellent, covering things Sophie had thought were impossible dreams. She got fitted for better leg braces, received medication for nerve pain, and started working with a specialist who helped her understand her injury better and what she could do to maximize her independence. With her basic needs finally met and her health improving, Sophie was able to focus on her work in ways she never could before. Her writing got even better. She was producing articles and case studies that were getting attention in the industry. The company's website traffic was increasing significantly thanks to her content. Christopher kept praising her work, and Sophie could tell he genuinely meant it, that this wasn't just pity or charity, but their relationship was changing in ways that went beyond work. Christopher had started finding excuses to visit Sophie's apartment. He would drop by with takeout for dinner, and they would sit on her couch talking for hours about everything and nothing. He recommended books and she recommended books back, and they would discuss them like they had that first day in the library. He made her laugh in ways she hadn't laughed since before her father died. One evening in July, Christopher brought over Thai food and they sat on Sophie's balcony watching the sunset. The city spread out before them, lights beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. "Can I ask you something?" Christopher said after a long, comfortable silence. "Sure," Sophie replied, taking a sip of her iced tea. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I mean really happy, not just better than before. Is this life what you want?" Sophie thought about the question carefully. "I'm happier than I've been in a long time. I have meaningful work, a beautiful place to live, my health is improving. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm actually living again." "Good," Christopher said quietly. "That's what I wanted to hear." He paused, then continued. "Sophie, I need to tell you something. When I met you at the library, I was immediately drawn to you. Your intelligence, your love of books, the way you talked about ideas. I wanted to help you because I saw someone struggling and I remembered what that felt like. But somewhere along the way, my feelings changed. It's not about helping anymore. It's about wanting to be around you. Wanting to hear what you think. Wanting to make you smile." Sophie's heart started beating faster. "Christopher, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this is complicated. I'm your boss. There's a power imbalance. I've been trying to help you get back on your feet. The last thing I want is for you to feel pressured, or like you owe me anything. So if what I'm about to say makes you uncomfortable, we can forget I said it and just stay friends and colleagues. But Sophie, I think I'm falling for you, and I needed you to know that." Sophie looked at Christopher, at this man who had appeared in her life when she needed someone most, who had seen past her wheelchair and her poverty to the person underneath. She thought about all the late-night conversations, the way he made her feel seen and valued, the way her heart lifted every time she saw his name on her phone. "You're not the only one with complicated feelings," Sophie said softly. "I've been trying to tell myself it's just gratitude, that I'm confusing thankfulness with something else. But it's not that. When you show up at my door, when you call, when you send me silly messages about articles you think I'd like, I feel happy in a way that has nothing to do with the help you've given me. I feel happy because you're you." Christopher's face broke into a wide smile. "Yeah? Yeah," Sophie confirmed, smiling back. "But you're right that it's complicated. I don't want people at work to think I only have my job because we're involved. I don't want to feel like I owe you my feelings because you helped me." "You don't owe me anything," Christopher said firmly. "Your job is yours because you're talented and hardworking. Your apartment is yours because everyone deserves a safe place to live. And whatever happens between us, that's because we choose it, not because of any obligation." They sat there on the balcony as the sky turned from pink to purple to deep blue, talking about what a relationship between them might look like, setting boundaries, being honest about their fears and hopes. It felt natural and right, like everything had been leading to this moment. As summer turned to fall, Sophie and Christopher's relationship deepened. They kept things professional at work, but outside the office, they were inseparable. He took her to restaurants she never dreamed she could afford. She introduced him to Mrs. Chen, who approved immediately and started calling him good boy in her broken English. They went to bookstores together, to concerts in the park, to art galleries. Christopher never made Sophie feel like her wheelchair was an obstacle. He just worked with her to find accessible ways to do things, and when places weren't accessible, he would get angry on her behalf and write complaint letters. Sophie also started taking online classes again, working toward finishing her degree. With her financial stress gone and her life stable, she had the time and energy to invest in her education. Christopher encouraged her, helped her study, celebrated every A she earned. Spring arrived again, bringing with it Sophie's 20th birthday. It had been just over a year since that terrible winter when she thought she might not survive. Now, looking at her life, Sophie could barely recognize the person she used to be. She had finished 2 more semesters of online classes and was on track to graduate next year. She had been promoted to senior content director at Christopher's company, leading a small team and mentoring newer writers. And most surprisingly, she had found love with someone who saw her completely, wheelchair and all, and loved every part of her. The night of her birthday, Christopher picked her up in his car, being mysterious about where they were going. Sophie had gotten used to his surprises by now. Sometimes he would take her to a new restaurant. Other times they would go to bookstores or art shows or just drive around the city talking. Whatever it was, she knew it would be thoughtful and meaningful, because that was how Christopher did everything. They drove for about 30 minutes, heading out of the city toward the countryside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Finally, Christopher pulled up to a beautiful restaurant right on the edge of a lake. The building was modern with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the water. Sophie could see an accessible ramp leading to the entrance, and her heart warmed at how Christopher always thought of these details. Inside, the host led them to a private table by the windows. The view was breathtaking. The lake stretched out before them perfectly still, reflecting the colorful sunset like a mirror. Sophie looked around at the elegant restaurant, at the other diners dressed in their finest clothes, and felt a wave of gratitude that she could be here, that this was her life now. "This is beautiful," Sophie said, reaching across the table to take Christopher's hand. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," Christopher replied, smiling at her in that way that still made her heart skip. "You deserve to be celebrated, Sophie, not just on your birthday but every day." They ordered dinner and talked easily the way they always did. They discussed a new project at work, a book Sophie was reading. Christopher's plans to expand the company to a second office. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences. This was what Sophie loved most about being with Christopher. Everything felt easy and right, like they had known each other forever instead of just 1 year. After dinner, as they sat with dessert and coffee, Christopher's expression turned more serious. "Sophie, there's something I want to talk to you about." "Actually, several things." Sophie felt a flutter of nervousness. "Okay. This past year has been the best year of my life," Christopher began. "Meeting you at the library that day changed everything for me. I had built a successful company, made money, achieved all the goals I set for myself when I was a kid in foster care with nothing. But something was missing. I had forgotten why I wanted success in the first place. I had forgotten about that teacher who helped me, about the promise I made to pay that kindness forward." He paused, looking out at the lake before continuing. "Then I met you. You were struggling, but you were so strong and proud and determined. You didn't ask for help or pity, you just wanted a chance to prove yourself. And when I gave you that chance, you exceeded every expectation. But more than that, you reminded me what really matters. It's not about the money or the success. It's about using what you have to help others to make someone's life better, to see people and care about them." Sophie felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "Christopher, let me finish," he said gently, smiling at her. "Sophie, you've made me a better person. You've taught me about resilience and dignity and strength. And somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you. Not because I helped you, but because of who you are. Your intelligence, your kindness, your humor, your ability to find beauty and meaning even in the hardest circumstances. So I have a question for you." Christopher reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. "I know we've only known each other for a year," Christopher said, "and I know our relationship started in an unconventional way. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Not as your boss or your benefactor or anything like that. Just as your partner, your friend, the person who gets to wake up next to you every morning. Sophie Carter, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a beautiful ring, simple and elegant, exactly what Sophie would have chosen for herself. She stared at it, then at Christopher, then back at the ring, trying to process what was happening. This man who had saved her life in so many ways was asking her to spend forever with him. "Yes," Sophie whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." Christopher slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. They kissed across the table while the other diners around them applauded. Sophie was crying happy tears again, overwhelmed by how much her life had transformed, how a chance meeting in a library had led to this perfect moment. On the drive back to the city, Sophie kept looking at her ring, watching it catch the light. "I can't believe this is real," she said. "A year ago I was freezing in that terrible apartment, thinking I would never be happy again. And now I'm engaged to the most wonderful man I've ever met." "Believe it," Christopher said, squeezing her hand. "And speaking of that apartment and that terrible winter, I want to talk to you about something else. I've been thinking a lot about how hard it was for you to find housing when you needed it most, how landlords discriminated against you because of your wheelchair, how expensive it was to find anything accessible. And I want to do something about it." Sophie looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" Christopher explained that he wanted to start a nonprofit organization focused on helping people with disabilities who were facing housing insecurity or homelessness. The organization would provide temporary accessible housing, help people find permanent homes, offer job training and placement services, and generally support people through difficult transitions. "I want you to help me build it," Christopher said. "Your experience, your understanding of what people actually need, that's invaluable. I can provide the funding and the business expertise, but I need someone who truly understands these issues from personal experience." Sophie was speechless for a moment. "You want me to run a nonprofit?" "I want us to run it together," Christopher clarified. "Obviously, you'll keep your role at the company if you want to, but this could be something we build as a team. A way to help other people the way someone once helped me, and the way I was able to help you." The idea excited Sophie in ways she hadn't expected. She had been helped so much over the past year, and the thought of being able to pass that forward, to spare other people the suffering she had endured, felt meaningful and important. "I love this idea," she said. "When can we start?" Over the next 6 months, Sophie and Christopher worked to establish the foundation. They hired staff, secured funding, found properties that could be converted into accessible temporary housing. Sophie used her writing skills to create compelling marketing materials and grant applications. She interviewed people with disabilities to understand what services would be most helpful. She poured her heart into the project, determined to create the kind of support system she wished had existed when she needed it. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday in November, almost exactly 2 years since Sophie's accident. The building they had chosen was beautiful, a renovated older structure right downtown. It had 6 accessible apartments for temporary housing, office space for staff, and a community room where residents could gather and support each other. The day of the opening, Sophie stood at the entrance watching people arrive. Local politicians came to show their support. The media was there to cover the story. Christopher's business contacts contributed generous donations. But most importantly, people with disabilities came, people who needed the services the foundation would provide, people who saw hope in what Sophie and Christopher had created. Mrs. Chen arrived early, dressed in her best outfit, beaming with pride. Sophie had insisted that Mrs. Chen cut the ceremonial ribbon, explaining to the crowd that this elderly woman had been there for her in the darkest time of her life, bringing food and warmth and companionship when Sophie had nothing. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears as she cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, officially opening the facility. During her speech, Sophie talked openly about her experience. She described the accident, the abandonment, the terrible apartment, the winter when she nearly gave up. She talked about how one act of kindness from Christopher had changed everything, but also how she had to learn that she was worthy of that kindness, that disability didn't make her less valuable as a human being. "I spent months feeling invisible," Sophie told the assembled crowd. "I felt like my life had ended when my ability to walk ended. But I learned something important. A wheelchair doesn't define you. Your circumstances don't define you. What defines you is how you respond to challenges, how you treat others, and whether you let hardship make you bitter or make you stronger. I also learned that asking for help isn't weakness. Community isn't charity. We all need each other, and there's no shame in that."